So, is Mortal Shell 2 worth it? I haven't played it, but a lot of people have, and the write-ups don't agree with each other. Some of them are calling this one of the most confident Souls-like sequels in years. Others came out of the open beta with a list of complaints long enough that the developers publicly said they were working on fixes. And there's one detail I keep coming back to. This game has no difficulty slider, but it does let you turn off the sun to make it harder. That's the kind of thing that tells you a studio knows exactly what it's doing, or that it's overthinking things. Here's why I think this one's actually interesting though. Mortal Shell was a budget Souls-like. $29, 15 hours, 4 playable shells, made by a studio nobody had heard of, and it sold over 1 million copies, which nobody expected. So the sequel is the classic test. What does a studio do when the small, weird thing works? Do they protect what made it good, or do they scale it into something that looks like everything else? Let's go through what changed, what people liked, what they didn't, and where everyone lands at the end. Mortal Shell 2 is from Cold Symmetry, published by Playstack. $50, PC, PlayStation 5 and Xbox Series. Quick context if you missed the first one. Mortal Shell came out as a smaller, cheaper Souls-like, where the gimmick was that you weren't a person. You possessed the bodies of dead warriors, called shells, each with their own stats and playstyle. It sold over 1 million copies, which for a studio that size is a serious result. The sequel scales that up hard enough that Gaming Bolt described it as near unrecognizable. The first game ran about 15 hours. The sequel is expected to run around 30. 4 shells became 8, and the world isn't a hub with a few branching paths anymore, it's an interconnected open world with more than 60 handcrafted dungeons scattered through it. Not procedural, hand-built, each one with its own loot and upgrade materials. One thing worth saying up front, you don't need to have played the original. Cold Symmetry built this as a standalone entry. Before we get into the changes, it's worth understanding what shells actually are, because the whole series is built on them. You're not a person in Mortal Shell, you're something small and vulnerable, and you survive by climbing inside the bodies of dead warriors and wearing them. Mechanically, that means each shell is a completely different character. Different health, different stamina, different weight, different abilities. And when you take a fatal hit, you get ejected from the shell instead of dying. You're now running around exposed, and you've got one chance to get back in before something finishes you. That's the idea nobody else has. Most Souls-likes give you a death and a run back to your corpse. This one gives you a second, worse life inside the same fight. The first game had 4 shells, the sequel has 8, and only 1 has been detailed publicly so far. That's not a small increase. If each one genuinely plays differently, you're looking at 8 distinct ways through a 30-hour game. The biggest change is philosophical, and it's the thing that'll decide whether you like this. The stamina bar is gone. In a Souls-like, that's not a small tweak. Stamina is the thing that stops you attacking. Take it away and the whole rhythm changes. You're not managing a resource between swings anymore, you're just fighting. Everything else points the same direction. There's a new shell called Proxima the Broodseeker with a hook that drags enemies into close range so you can follow up on them. And her mechanic is pure risk. When she takes damage, she gets stronger, more power, but you're closer to dying. That's a shell built for people who don't back off. And then there's the detail rock, paper, shotgun led with. There's an option that makes your executions refill your health. So the game gets easier the more aggressive you are. Kill something up close, get healed, keep going. That's not a difficulty setting, that's a design statement. The game is telling you the safe way to play is the hard way. 4 new weapon classes, all built around that aggression. Axe and Dagger for fast dual wielding, Black Needle for long reach precision, Battle Axe for heavy two-handed swings, and the Clockwork Scythe, described as the ambitious instrument of a madman or genius. That's how you write item text. The 7 new sidearms are more interesting though. The Nail Shot fires nail clusters like a shotgun, the Triarch Repeater is basically a medieval machine gun, and the Troubadour's Lute weaponizes music to disengage an enemy, a strange, almost pacifist option in a game about aggression. 8 shells, 4 weapon classes, 7 sidearms. That's a lot of build combinations for a Souls-like at this price. Let's talk about the 60 dungeons, because that number is doing a lot of work in the marketing, and I want to be careful about it. Cold Symmetry made a point of saying these are handcrafted, not procedurally generated. Each one has its own loot, upgrade materials, and hidden lore, and they're scattered through the world for you to find off the main path. That's the right call. Procedural dungeons in a Souls-like are almost always filler. You learn the pieces, and after 5 of them you're not exploring anymore, you're pattern matching. But 60 is a lot of hand-built content for a studio this size, and nobody's been able to say yet how long or complex any individual one is. There's a big difference between 60 proper dungeons and 60 rooms with a chest in them. I'd hold that number loosely until people have actually played through the full game. It's either the best thing about this release or the emptiest bullet point on the box. Now here's where two write-ups appear to contradict each other, and it's worth untangling. Gaming Bolt says there are no difficulty settings. Straight up From Software approach. One fixed challenge, take it or leave it. Rock Paper Shotgun's headline says you can lower the difficulty by making executions refill your health, or raise it by turning off the sun. Both are right, and the distinction matters. There's no easy, normal, hard menu. What there is instead is a set of modifiers you opt into, build choices and world options that shift how hard the game is without ever telling you you're playing on easy. And turning off the sun is a hell of a way to implement hard mode. You're not fighting tankier enemies with more health, you're fighting in the dark. I like that a lot, in principle. Whether it works in practice is exactly the kind of thing you can't tell from the outside. Right, the part that matters if you're deciding whether to spend $50. Cold Symmetry ran an open beta, and the same complaints came up again and again on the Steam forums. Camera motion people found unappealing, lighting too dim, sound design described as airy, which I read as thin, like the hits don't land with any weight behind them. Character movement going unnatural when you're locked onto an enemy, which in a Souls-like is a real problem because locked on movement is where you spend the entire fight. A lack of sword combos, and a shortage of accessibility options. Now, the developers responded. They said publicly they were aware and were working on fixes for the most widespread issues, targeting a launch patch. That's the right response, and I'll give them credit for it. But I've watched enough of these to know that "we're aware and working on it" covers a huge range of outcomes, and camera feel and animation are not quick fixes. There's one more, and it's the one I'd want answered most. The bosses are bigger and reportedly have more complex attack patterns than the first games, but Gaming Bolt flagged that the community is genuinely split on whether that actually makes them harder or just bigger. That's a distinction that separates a great Souls-like from an impressive looking one, and nobody could tell from a beta. So, is Mortal Shell 2 worth it? Here's where everyone landed. Gaming Bolt, positive overall. They describe the sweeping changes as being met with positivity, and their framing throughout is a studio scaling up with confidence. Rock Paper Shotgun, positive. Their coverage focuses on the design choices, the execution healing, the sun toggle, as smart ideas rather than gimmicks. The open beta community, split. Enthusiasm for the direction, real frustration with the camera, the lighting and the sound. And here's what they all agree on, which is the useful part. Nobody disputes the scope. 30 hours, 60 dungeons, 8 shells. This is a much bigger game than the original, and nobody's arguing otherwise. Nobody disputes the aggression pivot. Removing stamina and rewarding executions is a real design direction, not a marketing line. And nobody said the complaints were deal breakers. Every single one of them was a polish issue. Camera, lighting, audio, animation. Not systems, not design. So the answer comes down to one question. Do you trust a launch patch? If you do, and you want a Souls-like that punishes you for playing carefully, this looks like the most interesting one in a while. If you don't, everything people complained about is the kind of thing that gets fixed over the following months, and it will be cheaper by then too. Either way, this isn't a game anyone's calling bad. It's a game people are calling rough in specific places, and that's a very different problem. Links below. If you played the first one, is losing the stamina bar a deal breaker for you, or is that exactly what it needed?